Something was wrong. I woke up to the smell of a man's perfume. Now, I'm not the type to get paranoid over little things, but this wasn't right. The scent was faint, but distinct. It hung in the air, and I knew instantly it wasn't mine. My first thought was that it was something in the air freshener, or maybe the neighbors. Sometimes they use weird air scents that waft in through the walls. But this was different. It was a man's cologne, and it was strong enough to wake me up. I rubbed my eyes and sat up in bed, letting the sheets fall around me. As I adjusted to the dim light, I noticed something else. The ceiling above me was damp. Not just a little, but enough that the water was dripping down in slow, deliberate drops, forming a small puddle on the floor. I could feel a knot form in my stomach. The roof's been leaking for weeks now, but this was new. It shouldn't have been this bad. Not this fast. I stood up, still trying to shake off the sleep from my head, and called out to Brooke. "Hey, Brooke, the ceiling's leaking." There was no answer. Maybe she didn't hear me. The bathroom door was closed, but I could hear her humming from inside. That soft, almost musical hum she always did when she was getting ready. I walked to the bathroom and knocked softly. "Brooke, you hear me?" There was still no response. So, I opened the door. She was standing there, naked, toweling herself off, and she didn't look at me with the urgency I thought she would have. Instead, she was humming the same tune, just like always. "Just a shower after a run," she said, casually. But the thing is, Brooke hadn't run in years. She hadn't even brought it up as an idea in months. The last time I could remember her jogging was before we moved in together, years ago. I didn't say anything. My thoughts were swirling too much to form a response. I simply stood there, watching her as she smiled at me, her hair dripping, as if nothing was out of place. The water was still dripping from the ceiling when I stepped into the hallway. It made an awful noise, and I swear it sounded almost deliberate. I knew the house was old, but it never acted like this before. It was as if something else was leaking here. Something I wasn't supposed to know about. When I went upstairs to check on the leak, I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. But what I found made me stop in my tracks. The door to the guest bedroom was ajar. And standing there, in nothing but a towel, was Jason, our new neighbor. He had just moved in a few weeks ago, and I barely knew anything about him, just that he was a single guy who kept to himself. But the sight of him now made my skin crawl. There was something too relaxed about him, too comfortable. Hey," Jason said, glancing at me as I stood there. His body language screamed that he was in a hurry to get rid of me. I didn't blame him. I wasn't sure what I was doing either. "Hey," I said, not sure what else to say. I tried to keep my tone even. But as I stepped into the hallway, my eyes caught something that made my throat tighten. A pair of sneakers, white and scuffed, lying carelessly by the door. It was an odd thing to notice, but they were exactly the same as Brooke's sneakers. The same ones she wore when she ran. But why would they be here? And why would she leave them at Jason's place? I had trouble breathing, the scent of cologne lingering stronger now. Something wasn't right. I kept my face neutral, though my mind was racing. Jason didn't seem to notice. He just smiled awkwardly, trying to offer an explanation. "Yeah, I live alone. Just got out of the shower, you know?" He was too quick to dismiss my presence. I wasn't convinced. Not by a long shot. But I wasn't about to push it, at least not yet. As I stepped back, I saw something else. The door to his bedroom was cracked open, and through the gap, I could see something that caught my eye. A blouse. A woman's blouse, one that I recognized immediately. It was the one I had bought for Brooke's anniversary last year. She loved it, and I could remember the look on her face when she tried it on for the first time. But why the hell was it in Jason's room? I stood there for a moment, too stunned to speak. Jason cleared his throat, his eyes flickering uncomfortably. I could tell he was hiding something, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to confront him or just walk away. Finally, I spoke, my voice tight. "You sure you're alone in there?" Jason nodded quickly. "Yeah, just me." But something in the pit of my stomach told me I wasn't getting the full truth. Not by a long shot. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. The rest of the day felt like a haze. Brooke went about her routine like everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing grip on something. I followed her into the kitchen, trying to act natural as she hummed some song from a show she watched last week. She was cooking pasta, something she always did when she was stressed, but it didn't help. The smell of garlic and simmering sauce did nothing to calm the gnawing feeling in my stomach. I had to keep reminding myself that everything was fine, that she was still the woman I married. But there were little cracks now. The blouse in Jason's room, the sneakers by the door, and the unmistakable smell of a man's cologne still clung to the air. Brooke talked about her new job, and I nodded along, offering the occasional grunt to show I was listening. It was the same stuff, the same conversations, but today they felt hollow. She was so animated about the people she worked with, about the new projects she was tackling, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to her phone, which was sitting on the counter next to the cutting board, the screen just barely visible from where I stood. My fingers itched to grab it, to open the messages, to see if the knot in my gut was justified. But I didn't. I didn't want to admit that I was considering doing something so desperate. I wasn't the kind of guy who pried into someone else's privacy. At least, I didn't think I was. But then she went to the bathroom, and in that brief moment of solitude, I gave in. I took her phone off the counter, feeling like a thief, my heart racing. I unlocked it with the familiar pattern she'd set, and the first thing that came up was the Messenger app. I don't know why, but I clicked it. There was one message that stood out immediately. From Jason. Jason, I barely made it in time to leave before your husband. Maybe he'll have another leak tomorrow. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the blood drain from my face. The leak, the one I had been so concerned about, was no accident. It wasn't just a faulty pipe or bad weather. No, it was a signal. A message, if you will. Jason's words were clear, almost taunting, and in that moment, everything clicked. This wasn't just about the roof, or the shoes, or the blouse. This was something else. Something much worse. I didn't know what to do with the information I had just found. I closed the phone and set it back down where it had been, my hands trembling slightly. I stood there, staring at the counter, willing my heart to stop pounding so loudly in my chest. It was like I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. I had known something was off, but this was too much. When Brooke came back, I didn't say anything. I just watched her. She was humming again, wiping her hands on a towel, as if she hadn't just betrayed every shred of trust one had in her. It was like nothing had changed for her, and that made me feel even more isolated. I wanted to scream, to confront her, but I knew that wasn't the answer. I had to play this carefully. The truth wasn't something I could just blurt out, not yet. Not when I still didn't have all the pieces. Instead, I acted like everything was normal. I helped her set the table for dinner, silently moving around the kitchen as the weight of the situation crushed down on me. I couldn't even bring myself to eat, but I kept pushing food around on my plate, trying to look engaged in the conversation as she recounted the details of her workday. It wasn't until I saw her glance at her phone, the same way I had just moments ago, that I made up my mind. This wasn't about love anymore. It wasn't even about saving anything. It was about control. I needed to get ahead of this before it completely slipped away. As we sat down to eat, I excused myself to grab a bottle of whiskey from the cupboard. I figured I could use a drink, and maybe it would help me focus. I poured a glass and walked over to Jason, who had been unusually quiet since the beginning of the dinner. His eyes flickered between Brooke and me, like he was trying to figure out if we were onto him, and I could see the tension in his posture. But I wasn't going to let him off that easy. I raised my glass. Hey, I was thinking. Maybe we should get to know each other better. You know, as neighbors. What do you think? Jason stiffened, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he took the bait. Sure, yeah, that sounds fine, he said, though there was something off about the way he said it, like he wasn't sure whether to trust me or not. I took a slow sip, letting the burn of the alcohol settle in my chest before I spoke again. I had a dog once. A big, dumb golden retriever. Every time he'd steal food off the counter, he wouldn't hide it. He just looked me in the eye, directly, without a hint of fear. You know why? Because he didn't have to hide anything. He knew I wouldn't catch him. But every time I looked into those eyes, I knew what was going on. He didn't fear me. He feared being caught. Jason's expression changed, his eyes darting away from mine for a fraction of a second, and I knew. He couldn't look me in the eye. Not anymore. Why don't you tell me the truth, Jason? I asked, my voice steady, though inside, I was screaming. Jason's breath hitched, and for a moment, it seemed like he was going to break. But he didn't. Instead, he just swallowed hard, his hand gripping his glass tightly. He couldn't look at me anymore. And that, right there, was all I needed to know. The rest of the evening was awkward, strained, and suffocating. I don't know what I expected when I invited Jason to dinner, but it certainly wasn't this. Brooke had tried to make the best of it, pulling out all the conversational stops, asking Jason about his work and his life, trying to make him feel at home. But it was all forced. There was no natural flow to the conversation, no laughter, no genuine connection. The air between the three of us was thick with tension, and I could feel it in my chest, tightening with each passing minute. Jason's answers were clipped, as if he couldn't wait to leave, but he didn't have the courage to just walk out. And Brooke, well, she was pretending like everything was fine. But I could see it in her eyes. She knew what was happening. She had to. How could she not? I could feel my thoughts spinning as the dinner wore on. I tried to keep my attention on the food in front of me, moving the pasta around on my plate, pretending I was part of the conversation. But I couldn't focus on anything except the fact that the man sitting across from me was lying, and so was the woman I had spent years building a life with. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to wait until I had all the answers, but it was harder than I thought. My mind kept racing, running through the possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was this an affair? Or something more? Something darker? Jason's presence here, Brooke's strange behavior, the hidden messages, it all pointed to something I didn't want to believe. But I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. At some point, as the evening stretched on, I excused myself to grab another bottle of wine from the cellar. I brought it to the table, uncorking it with a slow, deliberate motion. I poured everyone a glass, including Jason, who looked at me with a raised brow. There was a shift in his demeanor when I set the bottle down. It was subtle, but I noticed it. I'd seen that look before, in people who knew they were about to be exposed. The nervous shift, the feigned calmness that couldn't quite cover the anxiety beneath the surface. I poured myself a glass and then raised it, not to toast anything, but to make a point. For 3, I said, my voice even. For the truth. Brooke's eyes met mine, a flicker of something passing through them. Fear? Guilt? I couldn't quite place it, but it was there. She swallowed hard and took a sip, her face a mask of casual indifference, though I could see how tight her jaw was. Jason followed suit, though his movements were stiff. We all drank, and the silence that followed was suffocating. It felt like the world had gone still, like we were trapped in some limbo, the truth hovering just beneath the surface, waiting to be pulled into the light. I could feel the weight of everything on me, the knowledge I had that Jason wasn't who he said he was, that Brooke wasn't who I thought she was. I didn't need to yell or scream. I didn't need to make a scene. All I needed was for them to crack, to break under the pressure of what they knew they had done. I could see it now. I could see the cracks in Brooke's carefully constructed world. The way her hands trembled ever so slightly as she set her wine glass down. The way her eyes wouldn't meet mine for too long. The guilt was written all over her face, but she wouldn't admit it. Not yet. Dinner went on longer than it should have. We forced laughter, small talk, and half-hearted questions, as though we were playing some game of normalcy. But I was done pretending. I had heard enough. I knew what I needed to do. After dinner, as Brooke went to clear the table, I asked Jason to stay. Hey, why don't you stick around for a bit? We can talk. Just the two of us. Jason hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between me and the door. There was a flicker of panic in his expression, but he nodded, pushing himself up from the table. He wasn't stupid. He knew the evening had taken a strange turn. He knew I wasn't going to let him leave without saying something. Brooke gave me a glance, her eyes widening slightly, but she didn't say anything. She just grabbed the plates and walked out of the room, leaving us alone. Jason stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, his towel still wrapped around his waist, as if he hadn't quite shaken off the tension of the night. I didn't need him to speak. I didn't need to hear more lies. Instead, I walked over to my desk, pulled out my phone, and hit play on the recording I had made earlier that evening. The conversation I had overheard between Brooke and Jason, the one that had confirmed everything I suspected. It played quietly through the speakers, but every word felt like a punch in the gut. Jason froze, his body stiffening as the words echoed through the room. Maybe he'll have another leak tomorrow, the message taunted, hanging in the air like an accusation. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. There was no need. I just looked at him, my eyes hard, waiting for him to respond. He couldn't even look at me now. He shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to the floor, to the walls, anywhere but at me. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. He knew. I could see it in his eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spoke. My voice was low, calm, but every word felt like a verdict. I just want you to leave. Both of you. Until the morning. And never come back. Jason didn't protest. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his face pale, and he turned to leave. As he stepped toward the door, I felt a strange sense of finality wash over me. It was over. I had my answer. Everything had come to light. And I had one. But the victory tasted hollow. Brooke came back into the room after Jason left, her face unreadable. She didn't ask about what happened. She didn't say anything at all. She just moved to the couch and sat down. I followed her, sitting next to her, but there was nothing to say. The truth had been revealed. The house felt emptier now, more silent. The stain on the ceiling, the one that had once been wet and dripping, was dry now. There was no more noise. No more water leaking through the ceiling, no more lies. Just the emptiness. And for the first time in days, I could breathe again. The following day felt like a slow-motion unraveling, every tick of the clock stretching the tension between Brooke and me further and further. She tried to act like nothing had changed, like we were just two people living out our usual routine. But I could feel the cracks beneath the surface, the tension in the air that neither of us could ignore. She was distant, not just physically, but emotionally. It was as if she had built up walls around herself, keeping her thoughts, her feelings, and whatever else she had been hiding, locked inside. I could tell she was trying to put on a brave face, but I wasn't fooled. The guilt was written all over her. I spent most of the day trying to avoid confrontation, knowing that the time wasn't right to push her for answers. But everything in me was screaming to just ask her, to rip the truth out of her. I wasn't going to make the same mistake Jason had made, saying things out loud before they were ready. Instead, I found myself pacing the house, my mind constantly drifting back to the things I knew. The message Jason had sent, the way he had looked at me, and most of all, the way Brooke had seemed so calm while everything around us was falling apart. It was almost as if she didn't care. Or maybe she cared too much. Maybe the truth was too ugly for her to face. By late afternoon, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to keep pretending that everything was fine. It was time to confront her, but I knew I had to be careful. There were too many things left unsaid, too many lies buried under the surface. I could feel her watching me as I moved around the house, waiting for me to make the first move. But I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to make this ugly. No, I was going to do this on my terms. When the sun started to set, I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet. I wasn't planning on getting drunk, but I needed something to calm my nerves, to steady my hand. I poured myself a glass, the amber liquid swirling in the glass as I stared at it, thinking about the woman who had shared so much of her life with me. The woman who had suddenly become a stranger. Brooke walked into the living room as I took my first sip. She was wearing that smile again, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She sat down beside me, her posture stiff, her legs tucked under her like she was trying to protect herself from something. I didn't need her to say anything. I already knew what was coming. I invited Jason over for a drink, I said, my voice steady, but the words felt heavy as they left my mouth. Brooke froze, her eyes widening ever so slightly, and I could see the panic flash across her face before she masked it with a forced smile. Why? She asked, her voice calm, too calm, almost rehearsed. I took another sip of whiskey, my fingers curling around the glass as I leaned back into the couch, studying her carefully. I thought it would be nice to get to know the guy better. You know, as neighbors. She didn't say anything, just looked at me, her lips pressing into a tight line. I could feel the weight of her silence, and it made my chest tighten. It was clear she was trying to hide something, but I didn't know if she thought she was fooling me or herself. The atmosphere in the room grew thicker with every passing second. I set my glass down and turned to face her. You know, I used to have a dog. Golden retriever, big guy. And he'd steal food off the counter all the time. I'd catch him, and he'd just look me in the eye. No shame. Not a hint of guilt. He didn't hide it, didn't feel the need to. He didn't fear me, or at least, not in the way I thought. He feared being caught. And every time I looked at him, I knew exactly what he was doing. Brooke shifted uncomfortably, her fingers picking at the fabric of her shirt as she avoided my gaze. I saw her swallow hard, but she didn't speak. It was as if she was waiting for me to keep talking, to fill the silence with something. Anything. But I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Not anymore. I leaned forward, my gaze never leaving hers. You know, I don't care what you've been doing, who you've been doing it with. But I'm done pretending. You can't look me in the eye and keep lying to me. Not anymore. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Her hands were shaking now, and I could see the sweat beading on her forehead, even though the room was cool. She opened her mouth to say something, but then closed it again, as if the words were caught in her throat. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want you to find out like this. I didn't want to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the quiet room. You didn't care about hurting me. You didn't care about anything but getting what you wanted. And now you're sitting here, telling me you didn't want me to find out? It's too late for that, Brooke. Too late. She flinched at the words, and I could see a tear slip down her cheek. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I didn't care that she was crying. I didn't care that she was sorry. I cared about the betrayal, about the lies she had told, about the fact that for months, maybe years, I had been living with someone who wasn't even the person I thought she was. I sat back again, watching her as she tried to compose herself. I wasn't going to forgive her. Not now, not ever. The damage was done. The truth had come out, and no amount of tears or apologies could fix it. Get your things together, I said quietly. You and Jason, you're leaving tonight. She stared at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. She didn't argue, didn't beg. She just nodded, her eyes red and swollen. I stayed in the living room, sipping my whiskey as she packed. The sound of her movements was the only thing breaking the silence. I didn't want to feel this way, angry, cold, but I couldn't help it. There was nothing left to say. The truth was out, and it had shattered everything. When she was finished, she came back into the room, her suitcase in hand. She didn't look at me as she walked toward the door. And I didn't look at her either. There was nothing left to say. She left, and when the door clicked shut behind her, I felt a strange kind of peace settle in the pit of my stomach. The house was empty, but for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt right. The house felt different without Brooke. It wasn't just the emptiness that echoed through the walls, but something deeper, like a heavy fog that had finally lifted. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. The weight in my chest had lessened, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. I had to force myself to stop thinking about the mess I had just walked out of. It wasn't easy. I had lived with that woman for years, and now she was gone. Not just physically, but emotionally. Everything between us had been an illusion, and once the curtain was pulled back, the truth was glaring, too bright to ignore. I spent the evening in the silence of the house, alone with my thoughts. I couldn't bring myself to do anything productive, couldn't focus on work, couldn't bring myself to watch TV or read. Instead, I found myself staring at the ceiling again, the same spot where the leak had been. The stain was gone now, dried up. The water had stopped dripping, and the room had returned to normal, or at least, it appeared that way. But underneath it all, I knew the truth was still there, lingering like a shadow that refused to leave. I thought about Jason, too. He hadn't just been some bystander in all of this. He was the catalyst, the one who had tipped the balance, even though I knew deep down that this had been coming for a long time. He had just made it clear. His presence in this whole mess felt like the final piece of the puzzle. The same man who had looked me in the eye, pretending nothing was wrong, was now gone, leaving behind a trail of lies that had brought everything crumbling down. But as I thought about him, I couldn't summon any anger. It was almost like I had been expecting this, like I had known from the start that something was off with him. Maybe I had been too focused on Brooke, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I had sensed it. The night stretched on, and I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey in hand. The bottle was almost empty now, the alcohol a warm presence that comforted me in a way nothing else could. I wasn't drunk, but I was far from sober, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to hide it. The truth had been exposed, and I didn't have to keep pretending anymore. I wasn't the perfect husband. I wasn't the perfect man. But at least now, I could see things clearly. I stood up and walked around the house, tracing the rooms with my eyes. The furniture was the same, the walls still held the same memories. Nothing had physically changed, but everything felt different. The way I moved through the space, the way the rooms felt when I entered them, it was all unfamiliar now. I couldn't go back to the way things had been. That door had been closed, and there was no opening it again. It wasn't until late that I thought about Brooke again. She hadn't called, hadn't texted. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't sure what I would even say to her if she did reach out. What was left to say? She had made her choices. I had made mine. And now, we were both left with the consequences of those choices. She was gone. Jason was gone. And I was here, alone, trying to piece together a life that felt like it had been torn apart at the seams. But in the silence, I found something unexpected. Peace. The kind of peace that comes with knowing that everything is out in the open. No more secrets. No more pretending. I wasn't alone in the way I had been when she was here, constantly wondering what was happening behind my back, constantly questioning every little detail. Now, I knew. And that knowledge, no matter how painful, gave me a strange sense of clarity. I lay down on the couch, looking up at the ceiling again. The stain was gone, but the emptiness still lingered. It wasn't a bad kind of emptiness, though. It was the kind that came after a storm had passed, when the air was still thick with the remnants of rain, But the clouds had cleared. There was nothing left to hide, nothing left to uncover. It was just me, the space, and the quiet. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept. The silence in my head, the quiet in the house, it was peaceful, and I let it wash over me. It wasn't the way I had imagined things would go, but I had found something. Something that had been missing for so long, the ability to just be. Alone, but free. And maybe that was enough for now. Maybe it would always be enough.